Over the course of this school year, our class has read 4 different core texts and several supplementary texts relating to what we were doing in class at the time. A common theme we have throughout all of the texts is having to develop questions and answer them in great detail. This video will be no different. My essential questions are: is there such a thing as fate? And to what extent do we control our own destinies? The first core text I will use to answer the essential question is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Throughout Of Mice and Men, one of the main characters, Lenny, keeps making dumb mistakes that put both him and the other main character, George, in a bad spot. The biggest mistake Lenny would make is accidentally killing a woman. Lenny and this woman, Curly's wife, are sitting in a barn when he starts petting her hair. She doesn't like it too much and tries to yell. To quiet her down, Lenny snaps her neck. "Now don't you do that," and she continued to struggle, and her eyes were wild with terror. He shook her then, and he was angry with her. "Don't you go yelling," he said, and he shook her, and her body flopped like a fish, and then she was still. Here we see the story of Curly's wife in one scene. Curly's wife was always the only woman on the ranch, therefore she was very lonely, and she couldn't talk to any men without being considered a tart. So the first time she tries talking to Lenny in private, she gets killed. Curly's wife was sealed from very beginning. After this scene, however, Lenny is in some deep trouble, so he runs off into the woods just like George had told him to in case he was in trouble, and waits for George. When George gets to him, he realizes that Lenny will either end up living in an asylum or Curly will lynch him, so he makes what he thinks to be the right decision and kills him. And George raised the gun and steadied it, and he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but his face set and his hand steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred, and then settled slowly forward to the sand and lay without quivering. Lenny's fate had been sealed from the beginning, as he is prone to finding himself and bringing others into difficult situations that he starts. Lenny was doomed to the ending he got from the first chapter, where George mentions their escape plan. That is just foreshadowing. The next core text that I will use to answer my essential questions is 102 Minutes by Jim Dwyer and Kevin Flynn. 102 Minutes is about the attacks of 9/11 and a small selection of real people and their stories during this time. One of the more exciting stories is the one of Stanley Premnath. Premnath was sitting in his office taking calls when a plane suddenly flew through the window of his floor. Premnath survived, but was trapped until another survivor named Brian Clark came along. Brian heard Premnath crying for help and knew he needed to help. "Help, help, I'm buried, is anybody there?" Clark turned to DeFrancisco, put a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, Ron," Clark said, "we gotta go get this guy." While this was going on, the group Brian was with was debating whether they should go up the stairs or down them. The group decided to go up, to which they realized there was no escape once they got up there. Had Brian went with them, instead of helping Premnath, he would have perished too, sealing the idea that it was fate for Brian to find Premnath, help him, and each of them help each other to get out. Besides Brian, Premnath also saved the life of his assistant by sending her home after seeing the first plane hit the other tower. Premnath was uncertain. "Delise, why don't you take the rest of the day off?" After Premnath did this, his whole team thought he was being overdramatic about the whole thing. But little did they know that Premnath had just saved their life. The scene shows how people can control their own destinies as well as others. I'll now be using a supplementary text to help answer my essential question even more. My supplementary text is To a Mouse by Robert Burns. To a Mouse is about a young man who accidentally overturns the soil of a mouse's nest. The young man talks to himself, thinking that he's apologizing to the mouse, even offering shacks of corn. "I'm truly sorry, Dominion has broke nature's social union." The man says this because he broke the mouse's house and also broke the barrier between humans and animals having an equal relationship. The mouse was doomed to this happening to him, and there wasn't anything either of them could do to stop this from happening. Shortly after this occurred, the man had said a very powerful sentence that wrapped up both his and the mouse's fate in a nutshell. "But, little mouse, you are not alone. proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes of mice and men go often askew. This basically means that no matter how much planning you put into something, it can always go differently. This applies to the essential question for fate, as sometimes you can't control what goes wrong. You can plan something out and it still goes differently. Some modern day examples of fate are natural disasters, as this is something nobody has control of and that we can only prepare for. A modern day example of destinies is love. It's something that you can't look for, but you can control how you go about it. In conclusion, the essential questions can be answered all by opinion, but my final verdict is that fate does exist and that we can control our destinies as far as we attempt to.